So a new look for you, Marion, is I thought this time I would just show you the mass of our continents. So this is Asia, which is the largest continent, at least of ground that places where people can live, and compare that to our huge population. So that's a real issue in our world. How is that continent that's so densely populated, they adjust to reduce climate change? And then you look at Africa, the second most rapidly growing continent. It's the size of North America, but has more than double of our density of population. So I'm just wondering, where do the elephants live in Africa now?
Grasslands, but I'm not sure exactly where that is. They're on the grasslands, and I think they do impose on villages, and
that's why they're coming up with solutions like bees, having the farmers have bees, because bees frightens elephants. And someone said something else too. But they have to come up with solutions now, because the elephants' habitat is, with this growing population, more densely populated than North America and South America. So that's amazing to me. This is more densely populated, all of this area, and they don't have the resources we have. And then even you look at Asia, that's a much smaller climate than the other two. Continent, but it's stable growth there, but it's much more than North America too. So right here is one of our challenges. And that's what we're going to talk about, how we can help mitigate some of the effects of this massive world population growth.
When did Australia become oceanic?
Well, it's they don't call it just Australia, because New Zealand and so there's other areas that are part of the continent that they're calling a continent. But most of Australia is uninhabitable, is why their population is not so great. Can't live in the center of Australia because it's desert. So their population is on the coastal areas of the.
What's that little breeze country up above?
Here?
Indonesia?
Yeah. So for some reason, who made that decision to split half of that off and call it Oceania, and the other half being part of Asia? So someone made that determination. I'm not sure who. And of course, this big mass up here has virtually no population. That's Greenland, which should be called Iceland. But Iceland's got more population than probably Greenland does, because of the nature of that habitat up there.
They created all those two countries since I had geography in school.
Well, and that's some of the issue. When we were talking about countries contributing to greenhouse gases, most of these countries, one reason why they weren't listed is because they're just small. They can be contributing a lot, but they're not a huge country. Like China is not, India was listed, China was listed, Japan was, and we were, but then you get to Europe, there's no country that's similar size.
Is Russia part of Asia too?
Yeah.
I thought that was more Russia.
Yeah, this is Russia.
it's the continent of Asia.
But Russia makes up a big chunk of that. But the reason why Russia is not that big, as far as greenhouse gases, is most of the Russia's, and you get up here, it's just too cold to live. You're not going to have major populations up in these regions because of the weather. But yeah, that's Russia, because Russia almost touches us. That's why Native Americans are mainly Asian genetically, and more Caucasian, I believe. So they're like 60% Asian and 40% Caucasian. So they have a unique genetic mix compared to people that live in this region today. that kind of traces back to where they came from. So we already talked about these. I'm going to address is the temperature and precipitation issues in Indiana, what we can do. And again, we've got 5 more inches of rainfall to deal with now than we did in 1895. So that's a significant amount. So water infiltration, I'm going to talk about that and how we manage water in our properties, addressing those major issues and how we can soften the temperature in urban areas by incorporating some parks and garden areas to offset the challenges that we face. So we're going to have a longer growing season again. So that means we're soon going to be zone 6A instead of zone 5B, because currently we're still 5B because we've had some significant weather events about 2013 or so, that really cold winter. So we'd still be zone 5B. But they're saying we're going to soon be zone 6A. In recent years, a milder winter, we're having things survive our winter without protection that wouldn't have in past years here in Marshall County. Good things like strawberries can survive the winter without protection more readily now. And bad things like bagworms survive the winter now because we don't get the cold to kill them. But we're going to have increased extreme heat days. So in our urban environment, if we can soften that urban area's heating effect of having all the concrete and asphalt and no greenery as much as more rural areas, that would be something we could strive for in the future. And the real issue is we got to deal with increased precipitation and the increased extreme precipitation events. So where is that water going to go and how are we going to manage it? And we struggle with managing it, collecting in sewer systems now in urban areas, which contributes to pollution because excess water goes to the rivers and streams from water treatment plants. They can't handle the water, and it tends not to be clean water that goes on. So what can we do, from a community solution standpoint? Well, we can make a softer urban environment, more green spaces, more, more areas where water can infiltrate into the soil and help cool the urban environment. Increased rainfall. We really need to move towards water retention instead of water going into sewer systems. We have to manage that water. So community solutions. Wish we would have known to do this 50 years ago before we had this population growth in our world. But we need to have green streets that incorporate vegetation to help first give an area for water to infiltrate into, but also to help transpire the water out of those soils. And that we know the cooling effect of plants. Have you ever had a pergola? Does anyone have a pergola that has like grapevines growing over it? Because that will give you, in the middle, I saw this grower over in the county to the west of us, Stark County, and his back porch was where his grape arbor was, grew the plants up over it. And what's neat is you can sit underneath that on a hot summer day. It's not only just the shade, but it's the transpiration of water out of those plants that gives a cooling effect. So if we can increase the green space in our urban areas, we can help soften the urban temperature. when I drive in to meetings in Plymouth, and we have plenty of green space in Plymouth compared to more urban environments. But the temperature is about 4 degrees warmer in the wintertime in Plymouth compared to when I leave Plymouth to go home. So that additional heat is good in the wintertime, I guess, to help soften the need for everyone to a little less heating bill maybe for everybody else, but that's wasted heat coming out of those homes that's giving that additional heat. But in the summertime, our air conditioning units are pumping out heat as they're cooling our houses. So that contributes to a warmer urban environment as well, along with just the concrete and the pavement storing heat, which is reflected in that winter temperature difference I saw driving into Plymouth. That was clearly apparent with my thermometer on my car. So it would include soil, permeable pavement instead of pavement that just is a transporting device to get water to the streets, to the gutters. We want that to be filtered and cleanse the stormwater runoff before it goes into our stormwater drain. So we're dealing with cleaner water that's going to have less impact on our waterways. I lived in southern Indiana, and the White River had 6 advisories on the fish in it. So it really wasn't safe to eat the fish that you would catch in the White River, particularly if you're a pregnant person. They said not going to eat any, but even if you're just me, there was a limited number I was supposed to eat because of all the contaminants in the Yellow River. And where's those contaminants coming from? All the water going through our urban areas into the White River. And the White River goes right through, downtown Indianapolis. So all that runoff coming from Indianapolis goes into that river. And by the time it gets down to southern Indiana, that water is not that safe to fish out of. We need to design systems to capture rainwater at its source, where it falls, versus being funneled into sewer systems to be transported to be dealt with at a facility later on. So this is a concept of a green street. We create water infiltration areas, sidewalks and driveways that allow water to go in. You could even have permeable pavement in the transit way, so there's places for water to flow in and be retained. And then having vegetation to pull the water out. Now I'm going to show you pictures of highways that have no sewer systems, and we're already doing this. Water infiltration versus trying to collect water to be transported in a sewer system. But for example, as you drive into Plymouth on Michigan Road, that greenery in the center of the street, those are just concrete pots. There's no water infiltration even in that container. Where in a green system, you'd have a center way where water would flow in, where it would infiltrate in the soil, and have just the excess water after it flows through that infiltration area collected to go in the sewer system. So we'll be cleaning our water before it gets to the sewer, and then most of the water will be infiltrated into the soil versus being transported by concrete, contaminated from auto traffic, and put in a sewer system to be treated. So this is one way we can help modify the impact of having warmer temperatures and that will add also more rainfall that impacts our waterways. So this is actually, Highway 6. There's the McDonald's. Over here's Michigan Road. And this is just a green area where water falls into, and that's a sewer system that's part of La Paz. But that's the concept I'm talking about. We have a greenery infiltration area to let the water infiltrate into the soil, and just the excess water from a major rain event will get to the sewer system. And what does get to the sewer system flows through an area that cleanses it. In agriculture, we already do this. Mandated by law to use atrazine, we got to maintain 66-foot strips before it gets to waterways. If we use that herbicide, because it moves with the water. So we're doing this system in agriculture, mandated by law, but we develop our urban areas not thinking about all this water we're going to have to manage as it falls down. So we want to increase open space. Parks, garden areas, downtown areas that soften the urban environment have areas that is not containing heat, but it can actually mitigate some of the heat that's being collected in these urban environments, can help with reducing the need for air conditioning, which can help reduce the use of energy, and also create an environment where people can thrive in these higher temperature events. Provide water infiltration areas to store moisture, reduce the volume of storm waters, and then we want to clean water before it enters the storm drains. But also, we're going to have that pergola effect. If we have more green areas where water is going to be stored and released and help modify the urban temperatures. So we're doing some of this. Howard Park in South Bend, so as we design these, it'd almost be nice and we show some where if we just create an area where the difference in elevation will allow the water to infiltrate into the soil instead of just run off into the river, and help clean the water going into that river, and help in that manner as well to help clean our rivers up. And it doesn't have to even be visible from the naked eye, just a change in elevation of swell to slow the water down where it gets a cleansing effect before it enters the river. We can just design things like that. This is just kind of showing the same idea. In Plymouth, instead of having this being a water absorption infiltration area, we tend to create areas where we plant trees and stuff where it's a hard bottom. So it's just a large pot that we're creating to grow plants in instead of being an infiltration area. The good thing in Plymouth, we have plenty of parkways, greenway trails, so we're doing the right thing. It's just we're going in some environments, downtown South Bend, it's going to be hard to do this because we didn't plan for it. So going back, it's going to be hard to do. Detroit, Michigan is a good example of a city that is taking these brownfields and turning them back into green space. So they're doing it because they get the opportunity because of economic failure in segments of their city, that they can redesign their city to create more green areas to help modify the environment of we're getting. So there's places that infiltrate water into the soil, and also open spaces where they can grow locally raised vegetables right in Detroit. So it's happening when there's opportunities. But I don't know about, I've driven through parts of Chicago, all urban, and I wouldn't want my car to stop either because the windows are boarded up and stuff like that. So we need to start redesigning our communities to make them more soft, safer, and help manage our excess rainfall that we're going to get here in the northern climate, and here in Chicago, South Bend, Mishawaka, and be thinking how we can manage this water differently than collecting it and shipping it off to a river before it's properly planned. So we see good examples on highways. So the water Has infiltration areas. Why? Because we don't have sewers for the water to go into. So the water runs off the highway into the green space in the center road, and this little, not really a ditch, but a low area to manage the water to infiltrate along the road. So we do this when we don't have the sewers to collect the water in.
That was your front yard.
That is.
I thought the house was really.
But so my little ditch here fills up with water on a heavy rain. We've had 6-inch rain events over a couple of day periods. It never overflows, it just soaks in. So that's a better way to manage water than putting it into a pipe and taking it someplace to be treated. Here, there's a clay layer, it's a riddled soil, so it's got a sandy, so it has a loamy sand is what it is on top, but you go down about 28 inches and you get a thick clay layer. That it's hard to dig through to put a post in the ground. And that's one of our common soils. We have other soils that have gravel under it in here in Marshall County, and it would just flow right through those. And then in Argus, this is a part that I took some pictures of. Again, we have an area where water infiltrates and doesn't run off. They don't have. And then here's a good example just south of Plymouth. Back here is an intermittent stream that it can flow into, but it goes in these low area and it gets cleansed before it gets to there. So we're cleaning our water before it gets to that intermittent stream, and can handle a lot of the water volume so the road's not flooded. Again, there's another in the same park. Again, we make gullies, areas for water to infiltrate in and to absorb in. I know in cities and urban environments, unless you're building new, it's hard to do this. In Germany, they did it, and they didn't have a sewer system underneath the infiltration area for heavy rain. So if you have like a 6-inch event, you need to be able to handle excess water capacity. But their goal was to mitigate the temperature and reduce the need to manage storm water in a pipe system the best they can. So, and like I said, in Detroit, they're moving to more of that system because they have the opportunity through having new open areas they can transition into infiltration areas and areas that can help modify the urban environment. But this was a real neat picture from my standpoint, because we have this low area where ponding will occur with low rains and infiltrate in, and then with heavier rains that gets to the drains, it will help clean up the water, having this grass area to do the cleaning before it gets to the pond environment in this park. And we already have water reservoirs. Indianapolis is running out of water. You know, they have reservoirs they use in addition to their well water, and Indianapolis is actually starting to run out of water. So this can be a dual-edged solution. It can help manage our excess rainfall that we're getting. It can provide us a water resource, and we can size these ponds for its the drainage area that it occurs. Because we do this with animal production. We make lagoons. And the idea of a properly sized lagoon is you never have to pump out of it, because when you get into the larger lagoon, transpiration will take the moisture out and it's treated. So the only area you ever want to pump out of is the first stage lagoon that's more concentrated. But that's what a properly designed lagoon does. It's just it manages the water resources that it's getting by transpiration versus needing to have it overflow and move on. So we can make cool areas in urban environments to help manage our excess rainfall. And we're doing it. It just, so as we do it, it's going to help mitigate some of the effects of climate change. I know in South Bend, we've restored areas and made them into more of a grassland area, which is going to help take out the water that goes into that water retention. And hopefully they're designed to clean up the water before it gets to the rivers. So we can reduce the impact of all this water flowing through these urban environments. This is actually a planting done by our SWCD. They got some funding to do it here. Again, here in by Plymouth, we have a natural or man-made, I don't know, a lower area between two housing areas where water can flow to be infiltrated in. And then we have perennial plants that have deeper root systems to help transpire that water out of the soil. So we can create these zones where we can help manage some of our excess water in more of a productive manner than having it flowing without being treated. So there's opportunity to create environments that's going to help mitigate some of the heat effect and process our water. And reduce the need for mowing. Because that's what's neat about these native planting areas. We've seen them along the highways. They look good when they're properly maintained to give the native plants a chance to get established. If you have something that seasonally has interest, so I'm kind of sad that I took this picture. The seasonal interest was highlighted. Some of the flowers were not in full bloom. It can look better. It does look better than that at times. So that's going to help with managing those impacts. And this is why. We had this slide up last week, but it's showing you the depth of some of our native plants that we can utilize into these native planting areas. So the roots will modify that soil, helping with some carbon storage, helping to transpire the water out of those soils and make them a good infiltration area and an attractive part of our communities. If we can find the land to devote to plantings like this to help reduce the impact of climate change. This is bluegrass. So bluegrass is going to have positives, but it's not going to be as good at transpiring water out of the soil as what some of our native forbs and grasses will do. Now this, so we have some of these prairie grasses that are native to us, and that's why we build up in those grasslands, such deep organic matter soils, is because of the depth that the roots grow down to and die back each year, putting the organic matter into the soil. So we can help increase the carbon storage, the organic matter in our soils down deep by the plants we plan to plant in some of these root water infiltration areas or zones that we don't want to have to be mowing. Some people like to mow them. I know people have 5 acres that they mow. So it's a recreational activity, I guess. If they plant some of it to more of a prairie type plant species, they could just let it be more native, habitat for wildlife, and actually do a better job of transpiration and carbon storage and organic matter built up in those soils. So from a homeowner standpoint, what can we do? We can design landscapes for water infiltration. And again, that's just swells. We do this, I've done this working with livestock producers to manage runoff that comes out of where they have livestock, that just a swell. So or in the case of lagoons, if you had an overflow, just as well, just make it flow before it gets to any water, you know, so it has time for infiltration and cleansing. That's one way we manage some livestock facilities, make sure that the water doesn't go directly into a waterway. Because we have mandated distances, we have to be away from waterways. But we do other things to help mitigate it. So we can design landscapes instead of just draining directly into the streets, that with a little swell, we can have the water infiltrate into our yards versus just flowing right out. So the excess water at least is cleansed before it leaves the property. We can manage our properties that have less impervious area compared to grass, similar to grass streets. When we're working with lake properties, that's our biggest issue. Is we tend to we want to build large homes on small lots, increase in impervious area compared to infiltration area. So that water is going to tend to drain off those impervious areas into the lake that they're enjoying. Create a rain garden for water infiltration and cleaning, which is an attractive garden area as part of your garden, your landscape. But it's a functional part of your garden area that's going to help manage your water on your property to reduce what's going into the stormwaters. Rain barrels is a tool that we can use, and we'll talk about that. We want to use responsible levels of fertilizers and pesticides. I feel sorry for people that live in subdivisions where you have to have perfect yards. It's a matter of, and that's where I see thatch layers from over-fertilization. We grow too much stem tissue, and over time, the plant is rooted up in the thatch that's created, and the roots no longer have a firm hold on the soil and start to not be productive plants. And that's from the amount of fertilizer we're feeding it and the irrigation to keep that grass productive the whole growing season long, so the neighbors don't get mad at you. That's the only time I've seen true thatch layers, is in those kind of managed turf environments. And we can compost our leaves and yard waste to recycle the nutrients that's present instead of sending them off to, well, I guess the cities have to do it now for us, because you can't directly take organic matter and place it in a landfill anymore. So someone's got to compost it. Sometimes it's a landfill that'll do some composting of it. But the neatest story there was in Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky would receive the leaves from Bowling Green, Kentucky, charge them to drop them off, cheaper than a landfill, so it's a good deal for Bowling Green. They would use a tub grinder, grind them up, turn them 3 times, and then in the spring of the year, sell them back to Bowling Green. And they would come out and get pickup loads of it to buy it to use the soil amendment in their garden beds. So a good way to manage that yard waste. They did it properly. I've seen some cities compost leaves that didn't do it properly, where the leaves were still full size and weren't as good of a compost in the end. We want to return the leaf clippings to our yard because that's nutrients that's being recycled. But we want a healthy turf to help store more carbon and transpire water. I have in my Master Gardener class a picture I love showing the height you mow at and the depth of the root of your turf. And it's directly correlated. The higher you mow your grass, the deeper root system you're going to have, and the more sturdy that plant's going to be during drought and dry areas times of the growing season. So you will have a better plant that will transpire water and build some good soil quality underneath it. If we mow at the right height and we fertilize at the right time. When is the best time to fertilize your yard?
Spring or fall?
Fall. You know, if you're a sprinter, the turf is sprinting in the spring already, trying to grow leaf tissue so that nitrogen in the spring helps it, but you're not going to get productive growth at that time of the year because it's sprinting. You know, during the summer months, our cool season grasses are under stress from the heat. In the fall of the year is when you rebuild the factory, build a new root system for the next growing season, and that's when you get productive storage of carbohydrates in the plant. So it's the fall fertilization in late summer. So we got to fertilize once in the year. You do it in this time of year, going into September, to sustain it through the fall season. The next time to fertilize turf that's productive is late October, early November, because again, you're storing nutrients in that plant. That's going to allow it to grow in the early growing season, the following spring. The spring fertilization is the sustain it during that spreading period. And we only fertilize turf in the summer as if it's a year where we get plenty of rainfall, like this year, where you irrigate. Again, going back to those native plants, those deep-rooted plants transpire water and store carbon. This can be trees, shrubs as well. So a tree in the landscape is going to help store some carbon. Christina said last week, your family needs 43 trees.
460 trees.
460 trees to offset your carbon footprint. So at least if we all have a nice specimen tree in our landscape, that's going to help with that need, meeting some of that, offsetting some of that carbon release that we're having in urban environments. We can design landscape or water infiltration. This house has no sewer by it, but you can just see that it's by its elevation and all this green space around it, the water is going to be infiltrated into its landscape versus having it run off into a intermittent stream or a river or a storm sewer for that matter. You know, so if we can think about where our water is going to go, when we're building a new house, like this is a newer home, we can kind of plan a landscape around our houses to help with water infiltration instead of water exiting our properties. From a community impact standpoint, rain gardens is a garden space that's going to help with water infiltration, purification, and also add to the beauty of the landscape. This is a rain garden done, sponsored by our local SWCD that goes into the Yellow River and our Centennial Park area. So what's its purpose? It's designed to soak up the water. We can plant deeply rooted vegetation plants that's going to help get you to transpire that moisture out. Designed to have a nice level bottom so that water collects. We'll talk a little bit about sizing here in a second, but compared to lawns, 30% more water soaks into the ground by designing this area that we can actually let water to flow in. We even have man-made small wetland areas. Kind of sounds a little different, but like in LaGrange County with the sandy soils, septic systems can't clean the water enough, so excess nutrients go out. And being in a well-drained environment, which you want for septic systems, some of those nutrients get into the groundwater. So they now utilize a wetland area to flow the water through out of the septic tank before it gets to the water infiltration areas as part of the design. So we can use Mother Nature, in this case, to manage water that's hitting our impervious areas on our lots to reduce what's getting into the stormwater drains, We also are using these kinds of systems to clean up our effluent when we need septic systems. They did a study in LaGrange County because they were having water quality issues in the Amish community. They first blamed livestock, then they blamed the piles of manure by the livestock farms. But they actually traced it back to being the infiltration areas of septic systems. So when we talk about the amount of manure that's in a livestock confinement facility, in our subdivisions, or when we have densely populated rural areas, the septic systems are posing some of the same problems that the people are concerned about the visible livestock. So we have to be careful to make sure our septic systems are properly functioning, and we may need to modify them to designs that will do a better job. I could put in a little section on designing the septic system, but I didn't want to bore people tonight with that. Because that's actually another offshoot of a problem from our more dense rural populations. So it's not complicated to figure the size of that you need, because we have these charts and the handouts we have, both of them have it in it. So the first thing we consider is how far is the water going to flow from the source before it gets to the rain garden. If it's less than 30 feet, then we consider the depth that we're digging our rain garden, and also the ability of the soil to infiltrate water. If it's 1 inch per hour, it'd be these numbers. If it's 0.14 to 1 inch per hour, we use larger numbers. And then 0.15 to 0.4, the factor is larger. And you simply just multiply the area that's producing the water, that surface area, by that number to determine the size of a rain garden that you need. And what they suggest is if it's a large impervious area, you may need more than one rain garden. So they prefer, from an aesthetic standpoint, keep them size at 300 square feet, because that's a pretty large rain garden. Now, if it's over 30 feet, they don't care about the depth of your rain garden, because the distance the water is going to travel. You just multiply it by these numbers, determine the size, because they're going to get more infiltration occurring as it's flowing across the yard before it gets to the rain garden. So we don't need one that's as big to accommodate the water that's being generated.
Go back there a second. Tell me how I'm getting my size.
So I've got my, the size of my house is 1,000 square foot times 0.03 is the size of the rain garden that I need. So 1,000 times 0.03, that's about 300 square foot.
So if you're at a school.
Well, this is to help manage some of the water that's being generated. The turf grass is going to handle some additional ones. So you're placing these in key places. One, where you may have a slope where the water is running off too fast, so it can help collect some of that downspout water into a rain garden to offset the velocity that water is flowing. And so it gives an option. The other option is to create by swells, just a grass area where it can flow into and act like an attractive retention pond. The retention ponds we make along with new construction, which is an important key to manage water from impervious areas. Being on the planning board now, my goal is I want water retained that you're creating that no longer goes into the soil, an area where it goes to before it goes through our ditches, because our ditches go to the Yellow River. The Yellow River can flood Plymouth, so we need to be thinking about ways to manage this excess rainfall productively. Because in a water retention area, the funniest question I got on it, someone from a subdivision came into my office and wanted to know why her pond keeps going down. It's not a pond. It's a water retention area designed to manage excess water from your subdivision. And obviously it's having some issues with infiltration. That's why it appears to be a pond. Because it's not, as much transpiration as infiltration in that case, because of the soil types underneath of that area designed to be an infiltration area. So we just need to be thinking proactively now on how we can manage new construction, the water coming off of that new impervious area, so it has a chance to infiltrate before it leaves the site. And I wasn't that big of a believer in it. Our surveyor was preaching this from the time he got elected. And now I'm on his bandwagon. I'm right there with him, because if you're going to create new impervious areas, you manage it. Don't expect us to manage it. That's all I'm asking. And I've lived this with my father, because I knew out by the Napney Airport, the farm we used to own was right across from it, and the industrial park built new impervious area, and it took out 2 acres of our ground. We no longer can farm, or could farm back then, because the excess water flow off that site went across the street in a pile, under a culvert, and impacted our property, and that shouldn't be allowed. So this is a fun project homeowners can do. And it'd be good in the lake community if we had more of these retention areas before it got, because I'm on the plan commission, and a lot of new construction, it's just, when you have a house, here's one house, 5 feet, 5 feet, starting the next house, we're creating channels for that impervious surface to funnel the water right to our lakes. And it's like old planning. In 1950, we go back to that population graph. We didn't have the issue back in 1950. And that's when a lot of, and that's not even that long ago, because South Bend was laid out long before that, with creating these urban environments that's all impervious. So I'm not faulting anyone, because in 1950 we didn't have these issues. And what is everyone's demanding now in the east side of Plymouth? We're developing all this new housing. We got more housing needs than we have housing available. So we just need to manage this. So we got some obvious benefits: reduce flooding, filter pollution, protects, replenishes the groundwater supply, provides food and shelter for wildlife, beautifies the landscape. Runoff water is directed in from building, streets, and other hard surfaces. Important for water management with increased rainfall. Native plants are deeply rooted. Maybe we can help reduce some mosquito environments by the water. It infiltrates, it doesn't pond, is the point there. And we just create a berm, which your handout shows you how to do, to hold the water back long enough for infiltration to occur. So it's not a bad addition to modern landscapes that can help keep water on site. So this is the one that I showed earlier. So we have this large area of infiltration, our collecting point for rainwater. And then we have a culvert that goes under the road in the park, and it goes into this wetland area, hoping to slow it down to reduce erosion of the banks as it flows into the river, and slow it down so it can infiltrate and get cleansed before it gets to the river. So we just need to be thinking about how we can manage our water resources to help not impact our surface waterways. From an agriculture standpoint, we have research documented by Ron Turco of Purdue demonstrating that if we don't have any cover crops or anything to pull nutrients out of our our fields in early spring, the runoff is going to be high in nitrates. And it's not what crop we grew there. It's not even tied to how much nitrogen we applied. It's tied to the fact that our soils are biological systems, and they start breaking down the organic matter as the soils warm up in the spring and releasing some nitrogen. So if we don't have systems to help keep some of those nutrients out of our waterways, then our waterways are going to tend to be, at higher levels of nutrients that we don't want. Question: what's the number one limiting nutrient in fresh water? Phosphorus, then nitrogen. So managing what's flowing. The good thing for our fresh waters is phosphorus tends to be tied to our soils. So if we're managing our soils not to have erosion, they tend to stay placed unless we over apply. Manures in the state of Indiana is managed by the level of phosphorus in our soils now versus how much nitrogen you apply. So a soil test will tell them if you can apply manure to a field now versus asking questions like how much manure did you apply. So if I have over 300 parts per million phosphorus, I no longer can apply phosphorus to that field. It's going to start leaching out as it gets higher.
Farm has to do that.
Yeah.
Funny difference between all I'm talking about.
Well, my first ag question was, why is my wheat flat? Is a wheat field behind a hog barn? Because whenever you had manure, not time to go to another field, you applied it in that field. So the wheat went down because of excessive nitrogen. But also that soil would have excessive phosphorus. And, 300 pounds per acre, that's when, or 300 parts per million, that's when it starts leaching. So it doesn't just stay tied to the soil, depending on the soil type. Regulators aren't good at saying this soil type you can have this level, and this soil type you can have this level. So it's a medium level, but it's not uncommon to see soil tests with 700 pounds of phosphorus if it's in a pasture field that's not been managed properly in rotation, or they have limited acres. We all see pasture ground that's a livestock holding area, not really a pasture. So those are the ones that could have issues. But where we apply the manure from large livestock facilities, CAFOs, they have to follow these rules. So Homestead Dairy now does a digesting process and a treatment process for their manures to reduce the need for land that they need to apply on by reducing the nutrient level of their waste before they land apply it. So we're doing things because of that requirement to help these fields not be as much of a source of that number one limiting nutrient, fresh water. Help clean it up from that standpoint. Another thing we can do is use rain barrels. This is funny. This is not my photo, but it kind of shows you some of the things not to do with the rain barrel. First of all, because of the weight, it needs to be on a stable area, and the overflow needs to be managed. And I'll have a better picture later on. But they do good things because we're capturing some of the water that's coming out of our downspouts. It's available then. There's a downspout attachments that are sold that will hook up to the rain barrel. But when the rain barrel is full, it has a shut-off valve and it just goes down the downspout. So there's better designs than what this one's showing. We can collect the water to use later, water our plants or wash cars. Some people are concerned about what's on the roof now, but we always can use it to wash our cars. And our lawn area can be utilized to water our lawns. But I should say the soil is the ultimate purifier of our water. So if we want to clean water up, we want to pass it through the soil. That's why septic systems work. That's when we land apply manure, it works because it cleans up the impurities that are in it. So I'm not that concerned about that, because if we put on our soils, they'll clean up that water. And if we use it for reasons that we'd be using our water that's coming out of our wells, so he utilized it. I covered that. The good thing is if you got hard water and you use salt to help reduce the hardness of your water, you've got a good water source to water plants with that's not high in salt or chlorine if it's city water. If you want to see what chlorine does to plants, if you have city water with it, water your spider plants consistently with it, it'll get dead tips.
I can verify that.
Because that's a common, at one plant that really shows up the chlorine in the city water. So you have to work hard to get water that doesn't have it in it if you have some plants that are sensitive to it. But this way we'd have those happy plants because they have nice clean water. I cover that. Things to think about. Well, where do you want a blue barrel? That could be the biggest issue with a rain barrel is, do you have a spot where you can place it? This looks like an out of the way place, so I would agree that's meeting that need there. You want a convenient place, close to downspouts and water use, so that makes sense, so you don't have to have the water flow too far. It would be good if you selected a downspout that had some water drainage issues associated with it. So you're collecting water that reduces the area. I've seen where people have downspouts where plants are just dying because it keeps it too wet. So that'd be a good area to put a rain barrel that reduce the water that's flowing into that part of your garden space. So it can add to the aesthetics. If you have a rain barrel that's, if the plants are around it, you don't see the rain barrel, it could work. And so we want to think about elevation. And my concern here is, I think that's soil and that's a concrete base. So it may be more sturdy than it looks, but it looks a little unstable to me. Because we want to think about safety. It's going to weigh 500 pounds. So you need a level area away from pets and children. I have a 4-year-old grandson that if it's there, he'll mess with it. I mean, it does the given. I got a 6-year-old and it's not that way as much, but Wyatt, he just likes to test things. So he will want to test it. Does this picture look better? That's more of my vision of a properly built rain barrel system. You've got a level, sturdy, elevated area to place the barrels on. You have a properly designed overflow in case once the barrels are full. Then we have a nice area to drain the water barrels out, and they're all connected to that downspout. So you pull the water out of all of them by plumbing them together. So it's a good design. And where you get expensive is finding barrels that are relatively cheap to utilize, and just the cost in your base, the material that you currently now, and then this how you're going to design that overflow. But that insert into a downspout is probably the trickiest way to do it. That doesn't look odd. That can fill the barrels up.
I don't know if I can get those barrels upside down.
He does. In this case, that's just how he has them plumbed together. The handout I gave you is more like we had a master gardener. That's the one I was talking about. So the system used here is more similar to what he did. We had them standing right side up, and you just need to plumb them together. So it's not a complicated system to do. and to store some water where you may need it. Like, yeah, first-hand experience. And I was thinking actually of, you know, if you have an area where you have some livestock or a garden that's just not close to a water source, you can create an area to store some water. But these are just a couple things that we can do as homeowners to help offset the climate change that's occurring. Cities' investment into open space and infiltration areas is going to be an ongoing expense that I think they're going to need to do, because we can't keep expanding our capacity to handle stormwater. That's the most, I mean, we have the sewage water that we're going to have to deal with, but the stormwater shouldn't be something that we're spending a lot of money on, or directly just piping it contaminated into our waterways. So these are things that we can do.
Have you seen the breakdown for the out there? Limestone pits?
They are?
Yeah, they have, it's a building. In Chicago, they use concrete cisterns now, like the water.
Mhm.
That are the size of stadiums. There are these tunnels that are 10 times as high as this room, like this room, that run out to the. There was a huge limestone quarry,
Mhm.
and they're running it to their quarry up in the middle of the rain. Well, all at once, Chicago's grown, and now they're taking the second big quarry next to it. I got two of them here. James.
Well, and the problem just is going to get worse here in our changing climate. Not only the continued expansion of housing needs, I mean, and I'm not involved in this housing addition by Plymouth because that's not in my part of the county that my plan commission is in charge of. That's in the 2 mile zone around Plymouth, so it's the local plan commission. And Ralph Booker used to be our plan director for our, I'm sure he put some thought into water retention when they do that, but all this new construction needs to slow this water down on site before it leaves the site, and infiltration is the solution, not the enemy.
You know, of course, they water management. I mean, what they need to do, it's all out there. They know how to do this. It's just getting the government to make it happen, and the finances involved.
Well, we already do it. That's my pictures are showing. We already do it when we don't have sewers. We go to the water infiltration solution, and that means in an urban environment, as there's dilapidated buildings, instead of building a new building there, now that you use that as a garden spot to help soften the urban environment versus building a new building in that location. And I don't know about urban. You know, they're doing some of the neat things that you can do, greenhouses on top of roofs. So you're doing some, utilizing the heat that's escaping from the building and using it productively. And Chicago has a lot of green space. They just need to start using some of those green spaces for water infiltration instead of just pumping it to a limestone quarry. If we can at least pass it through an infiltration area before it goes in the sewer system. So they actually have 7 federal wildlife managers. The federal wildlife that lives in the city of Chicago. You don't think about it, but they have areas that are wetlands already. So I think, I don't know if they are, but they should be utilizing those to their advantage to reduce this water load that they're managing. I don't see how you can afford to keep creating spaces to unnaturally hold water for water you're generating on an urban environment. And if we can create those infiltration areas when it makes sense to do it, you're going to soften that urban environment as well. Because more green space you incorporate into an urban environment can help soften that temperature.
Plastic pollution in Germany, they found out they have to do it. So they've been doing 300 years, so we're good at it.
Yes.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Stuff they went through.
That's kind of, I showed that picture of the continent that's producing, have most of the population, so the density is greater in Europe, but they've managed their population better than Asia. And now Africa has exploded, where it has more population than Europe. So Europe's done a good job of learning we have limited space, and we have to relearn this idea in our minds that we don't have endless space. That in these urban environments, we're going to have to modify how we do development to help modify that urban environment to be a better place to live. And having a skyscraper, you need some green area around that to help offset that impact of that building. Because I still remember when my wife and I went to Chicago, this is neat, is before cell phone. Back in the day, and how did they communicate? They stuck the lower level, stuck her head out and yelled at the upper level, and they were talking back and forth with their heads out the window at different level of the house. But there's a lot of people that lived in that apartment complex that was multi-level. So we, as we're generating that energy use, that heat, we need stuff to help soften that, to make these environments cooler and offset this heat. I don't know what else we're going to do. Managing water is not easy. Water wins. We don't give it places to flow. It's happening right here in Plymouth. So that's some of the resources that we highlighted tonight. That's a good Purdue publication that gives an overview of some of what I talked about and even more. It does address septic systems somewhat in there, but we really have to. Here in Marshall County, the exciting thing is we're trying to go to rural treatment systems. So we're moving that ball forward finally, because the lake communities, if you look at a typical lake lot, it was never designed square footage to have year-round housing on it. So how we can alleviate these problems is having water treatment facilities to service them. And they're starting out looking at little communities like Tyner and using wetlands as the final treatment after it goes through collecting the water and doing some initial treatment, finding the wetland area. Because Mother Nature can do a good job if we size it to meet the demands that's being utilized. Because we can't pipe Tyner's water clear to Plymouth or to Walker to be treated. So we need to come up with a system that's going to be more cost effective for them to adopt. So they're looking at for Tyner, the Tea Garden, two communities that should not have been built where they were, especially Tea Garden. That's the exact, that used to be a swamp where Tea Garden. Where Tea Garden used to be a swamp, the drain swamp. Yes, I mean, it's not where houses should be or septic systems should be. And, and that community doesn't have the wealth in it that needs to do a high level treatment system, but we need to do something better than a septic system in a soil that doesn't allow for a good drainage. So that's the idea, is where your leach field is, it needs to go through soil before it gets to groundwater. That's the treatment. That's the leaching through that soil and then finding that soil. So like around some of our lake communities, they have these, what they used to call, they're not a leach field, but it was an area where the water flew in and settled. But with those high level lake communities where the house was way above the lake level, I mean, they're shutting them down if they're having issues to no places to put new leach fields, but I think they probably work because in livestock, we want to stop leakage. We put manure, we use hog manure. Is one thing we used to recommend to put in the lagoons so you'd have a permanent, a bottom that wouldn't leach. So if that translates to us, I think those bottoms of those areas or slows the infiltration enough that when it gets into the soil after going through a septic tank, it's going to clean it before it gets to the groundwater when they're up high. Not Lake of the Woods. No, that's why they got a water treatment system. You know, so when your house and your leach field is almost at the same level as the lake, they don't work. That's just common sense. So that's a good thing that's happening in our county to address that side of the issue. So I just want to do some overview of things that we can do. And looking at some properties, they're not designed for water retention. They're designed to take the water to the street, the sewer system. So if we could it's just a swell here, a swell there, we could retain water. And when we build new homes, we can design the landscape just to hold the water back before it exits. And the impervious driveways would make more sense than this concrete that you're going to have to fix down the road anyways. So we can do things. So I'm hoping for a impervious
asphalt.
Yeah, they're addressing this issue.
I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen it. I just seen what they have at Ancella, which is, you know, blocks that just have openings where the water can flow in. But the impervious asphalt would be a great idea. Anything to help with water going into the soil where it gets treated instead of going to the storm drains, which we can't manage. We've never managed them.
Those blocks really is pervious. Because once you fill them with old stone pebbles and stuff, you can get back down. They don't suck water anymore. It runs right off them.
I'm probably correct.
But they do have one. They're using up, Northwest Indiana. It's like asphalt. Great.
Well, come back to the zone. That's going to reduce the movement of water into the soil, whether it's so we can count tightly packed gravel as impervious versus pervious because the water is not going to tend to flow in it as well. Oh, Ty, Hadley.
Yeah,
Well, it depends where they're at. And Ancilla probably works because they don't have much traffic on top of that. So theirs are designed to receive water and go into the soil by how they were installed and how they're not placing gravel over them. It's a moon tree right across.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so I think theirs are pervious because they didn't design it. I mean, they didn't fill with rock and compact it hard down. So how you place them is an important factor if they're going to be at all helping the situation. Oh, she's just passionate about this stuff. Long before I was, even thinking this way totally, but I just think that we're going to need to do this because now we have more rain. It used to be 36 inches of rainfall in northern Indiana. Now we're up over 40. And southern Indiana is even worse than us. And then we want our waterways to be cleaner than what they are. So we need to be just being proactive and coming with solutions.
Once the right people in the room, the answers are there.
We're already doing it. When we don't have sewers, we're forced to do water infiltration, not collecting water and dealing with it. And our cities, how they dealt with it in 1950 was when we had a major rain event, the sewage and the stormwater went to the river. It didn't even go to the treatment plant. It used to be dilution is the secret to pollution, and that we considered the rainwater to be the dilution at that time because we had no system to control it. So
there aren't very many of you doing it. It doesn't seem like.
All right. It says we're having the issue right here in Plymouth. And the urban areas are even worse. I can't imagine I've never been to New York City. I'm not even that excited to go. any place that has more than the state of population of Indiana living in that small area. I mean, what is their solution? And they're not even the biggest city. Mexico City has even got a bigger problem.
Detroit. In the river, just before you go into Lake Erie. There's an island, it's called Slow. All the roads began years ago. There was not an island. They poured this stuff in. Now there's an island. It's got trees and stuff. But it's still controlled. Everything goes in there. Non-industrial plants and everything. Okay, we're gonna choose it out.
Well, and yeah, and you get these urban environments. My son-in-law will cut still, he was taught when he was young because of aquatic animals. Yet those ringers that hold 6 cans of pop together, you got to cut those openings so sea turtle doesn't get wrapped around their neck. Well, I think in some of these urban areas, they need to do it because who knows where their trash is going.
See if I can use one.
And and that's someone was having their property checked out for environmental hazards before he put his property in for sale. And the person with the contracted by the bank to go out to the environmental inspection was good with his property until he had to do what men do outside. And where he went is where this guy was dumping his oil and stuff. So I went from a clean bill of health to a major problem because it was decades of proper disposal of oil. So that contaminated that soil site. So that was obviously an issue with whoever was going to buy that property now. I didn't buy it. And then old fertilizer plants usually aren't sold, like Sierra Solutions plant here, and they still own it. They shut it down, but they're not selling it. Like, they're selling the property beside it, they sold, but the plant itself, like they were telling people like the boundary on finding